Welcome back to the Parable Arrows video podcast. I'm joined again by Jake B. We're all wearing the same stuff, so it's the same day. What?
Sorry.
What?
Okay, to be fair, you adjusted the
That's
camera,
fine.
So I just want to move it up a little bit.
That's cool.
Just 'cause
We want to get all the
your
figurines.
head is
In
right at the top of the frame right now. So
Is that the villain from My Hero? I forgot his name.
One of the
Stain.
reasons that My Hero is a show that grates on my nerves is because of how they did my man. Like,
He had a great story, and then they didn't follow up on it.
great lore, great everything, and then he just
Well, to be
Just
fair,
disappeared.
though, I mean, the show's still going on. I haven't watched the new season yet, but
I haven't either.
I don't at all. I don't really watch anime other than The Last Airbender, but it's not really anime.
that's not an anime.
It's not anime.
Get your anime game out, bro.
Again, you can just.
Okay, we'll just start then. You good? We good? Everything looks good? How's the lighting on?
It's good. Just
Yeah?
read the intro.
Okay. Here we go. Oh man, I'm running out of steam.
Yeah.
You want to do it? Go
You
for
want me
it.
to do it?
Yeah, no.
All right.
Go for it.
Give me your best shot.
Alrighty. All right, guys. Welcome back to Parable Arrows. I'm your new host, Joshua Solomon, not Cook. Today as our guest, we have
Me, Josh K, Cook.
and
Me, Jake B.
yeah, and today we're gonna be talking about the Book of Eli, fantastic movie starring Denzel Washington, and talking about the tropes, themes, and things we can apply to our lives. So, take it away, original host.
That was really good.
Oh, thank you.
I'm very impressed. Dude, it must be a Josh thing.
Yeah, it
You know,
has to be.
Maybe. All right.
Synced up.
Make good hosts.
So before we get too far into it, yes, this is the Parable Arrows podcast, the video podcast. And I want to ask, because you said a story, Josh, about your dad, and I want you to retell it, even though we've already heard it, the three of us. I wanted to ask you too, Jake, is there anything about this movie when you first watched it where you had a similar experience? Like, I feel like Book of Eli, that name alone, when people first saw it coming in like ads and Denzel Washington and all this stuff, people were probably like, Book of Eli, that sounds like Jonah or Psalms or Job. Like, I bet it's going to be a Christian movie. And, you know, they were all excited because Denzel was in it. Did you guys fall for any of that or have any experiences with it beyond just like when you went to go see it?
Yeah, I know for me, the story I told you guys was my dad, I was still like 13, 14 around this time. So I didn't look into this, but my dad saw the title and definitely thought, oh, this has got to be a Christian movie. And we had family in town, so he wants to take us all to the movie theater. And the one time he doesn't look up the reviews or read the summary and the synopsis and everything like that, takes us in. First couple scenes, just starts fighting, arms getting cut off, and he's just mortified. And I remember I was sitting there looking at him like, thank you. Like, it's the best day of my life. And as much as he wanted to have us avoid, typically the violent themes that you do see in the movie, he actually did end up loving it, and he like bought the DVD, and we watched it like 3-4 times as a family. And he's like, you really like sit down and watch the themes. It's actually very good. But yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Jake, did you have anything like that?
Nothing quite like that, but my dad also was trying to get me to watch the movie, and I'm pretty sure I like fell asleep the first 2 times we tried watching it, just because I was younger and didn't really. It was probably late and whatever, but once I watched it all the way fully through, it was like one of my favorite movies. So
Nice.
awesome.
Cool. Yeah. Josh, where would you rank this movie with Denzel? I know he's got quite the catalog, so.
Oh, it's one of my it's one of the first movies I saw with Denzel, and obviously with the story, it holds a special place in my heart.
Yeah.
It's in my top 10 favorite movies. I know that. I did a list with my friends, and I know it's in my top 10 favorite movies. Not necessarily best movies, obviously, but favorite movies for me.
Sure.
I think it's in my top 10, somewhere in like the 8 to 10 range, I think.
What was the one that showed you how dark and violent the world is, right?
Yeah.
Like, never forget.
Yeah.
Never forget. Love it. All right. So the first question I have, and so there's a quote actually from the guy who wrote the movie that I'm going to ask. And this may have the potential to bend into kind of like a artist intention versus audience reception conversation. That's totally fine. The goal is to kind of talk more about like the themes of faith and stuff like that. But this is Gary Whitta, who tweeted back when the movie first came out. People were asking him, what's the deal with this movie? Like, what's with all these religious things? And so he says in this tweet, I'm an atheist, Book of Eli was intended to be a story about the positive power of personal faith and the destructive power of organized religion. So what do you think about that statement that someone who from the outset is claiming, I do not ascribe to any religion, I do not even ascribe to there being a God, and he is making a creative statement saying that when he wrote this story, he is trying to capture the differences between personal faith and organized religion. So maybe to start, what's your gut reaction to that statement from the writer?
I had no idea he was an atheist. That's actually kind of
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Same.
Hey, he did a really good job for getting the point across. I mean,
Sure.
when you're comparing Eli to, I'm sorry, I forget his name. I know it starts with a C. The main antagonist.
See if I have it on my list. But yeah, keep going.
The idea how they both have the same goal of getting that book to humanity, but the way they're doing it is obviously the antagonist is doing that. He wants the book only for himself so that he can control the masses through it, whereas Eli wants them to have it in the right way, so he says. So no, I think the director did a great job with that. I'm just
Sure.
still kind of shocked as an atheist. I
Yeah.
had no idea.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Jake, any thoughts on that?
Same. I was blown away when I heard about that at first, and just like his perspective as not, like you said, ascribing any religion, of the power of personal faith. I just thought that was interesting, and his perspective on organized religion. So it was like really interesting to watch the movie knowing that, because I didn't know that the first time I saw this. So that was fascinating.
Yeah. So thinking of that, so Eli is meant to resemble personal faith. He's kind of the he's who we're rooting for. He's who's going on this mission, carrying the book. We don't know what the book is until the end. Do you think there's anything that the movie misrepresents about what it actually means to be a person of faith? Or do you feel like it was actually pretty accurate? If you had to think of a character like Eli in the midst of a world that's dark and brooding and dangerous, like the one he's in, is there anything that seemed, I mean, I don't want to say unrealistic because it's a fiction movie. Like, I get it. Like, that's kind of assumed. But something in reading that statement, from someone who doesn't have a faith, like, it's not like he was like, well, I'm kind of a universalist and I see all these themes across all the religions and this is kind of what I'm saying. He's like, I don't ascribe to any of this. Mm-hmm. And yet he's capturing very accurately for a lot of the film personal faith, that there's an unknown, there's a walking, there's a trust. But was there anything that you felt like maybe like, wow, this isn't necessarily like a bad misinterpretation or expression of faith, but I don't know if that's how I would say my Christian faith actually plays out in like following God.
Yeah, I know for me, I could say for sure his unparalleled like drive, the fact he's just like, I'm going west, and literally doesn't question anything. That doesn't look like me at all.
Sure.
I question everything, and it's not bad to. I always, whenever I talk about this with other people, it's not bad to question. It's about where those questions take you, obviously, doubt wise. And if we're gonna talk about him, obviously, I think that's his show of faith is probably more what we should aspire to in his unwavering. Just like, I have one direction, and you find out he's been doing it for like 30 years or something. He's been walking for a long time and just never questioned it. Doesn't look like me, but something we can at least aspire to be, at least.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
I want to come back to that, but Jake, how about you?
Yeah, same. I mean, the mission that he's on, like, is so, I mean, that's his whole life, is bring this book west, right? And he doesn't even quite know what it's going to look like or whatnot. And I feel like that's a great example of someone with personal faith that is so strong, and not everybody, obviously, most people with a personal faith probably aren't that driven, towards their faith. And like you said, Josh, it's probably the goal and what we should strive to be like. But yeah, I still think it was a great representation of like taking on a personal faith and all the challenges that come with that, and the mission that comes with that.
Yeah. So the mission is get west. There's a scene early in the movie where he's walking and, we find out that Eli's blind. He can't see. And he hears someone or like a couple or something being attacked by some robbers. And at some point, the thing that he mutters to himself is, keep going west, keep going west, keep going west. Part of me, thinking deeper about it, is actually really curious about that because kind of like we, in our Toy Story episode, Jake and I were kind of parsing out, okay, what would it look like for the story to have been set up different, where maybe, you know, these characters end up with this kid at the start and stuff like that. Part of me wonders, okay, so if this guy has been reading the Bible, the whole movie, spoiler alert, which is a very old movie, if he's carrying around and has been reading the Bible the whole time, and the mission is to get the Bible there, it's to deliver something, it's not to live out what he has. So even though he's read through the story, even though he's read through all these things, even though he's read through like these verses that are about, like, you know, take care of the poor, the sick, and the sinner and all this stuff, he has the scene that he's hearing play out, and his mind, not out of fear, but almost like, no, that's not like my job. Like, I don't need to deal with this. Thinking deeper about that, what does that resonate with you in like your own personal walk? Do you feel like that's maybe something where it's like, man, I think Eli made the right decision? Do you feel like that's like, how would you just think about or reflect on that scene personally?
So I remember rewatching that scene and seeing like the struggle he kind of has, like looking over and being like, oh, wants to do something. And he does end up avenging that couple later on at the bar. And this question did pop in my mind. We know that, like you said, he's reading through the Bible, but how much of it really applies to him in terms of he's obviously killing lots of people. But again, he's not going out of his way to do it. It's only when the time comes for that. This is the question it almost poses in my mind. I've always, since the first time I watched it, I've always had an idea that this is taking place. This is Revelation. That big, like, wipeout that they're talking about, the big thing in the sky. I just assumed that was everybody going up for the first rapture, and then this is like all the crap that happens after, and then there's like a second chance they talk about. So I always watched it since I was a kid with the assumption that a lot of those rules don't apply to him. That's just the thought I've always had in the back of my mind since I first watched it was, oh, he's in Revelation. God gave him a mission to do. Sometimes the prophet, this is my like 13-year-old self thinking that it's always stuck with me, is like, prophets did a lot of killing too. I can't remember. Elijah killed all the prophets of Baal.
I think Samuel kills. There's a guy where Saul doesn't kill somebody. I just read that recently. And Saul's like, all right, come here, bud. Or Samuel's like, come here, bud. And he's like, all right, what's going to happen? You know, takes care of business. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, well, when God burdened someone in the Old Testament, at least, with a mission, I'm not saying it, oh, you're like a secret agent now, no rules apply to you, but that's almost the thought I've just had towards Eli is he's not going out of his way to do it. It's not that he enjoys it, but he very clearly has a directive, and it's made clear that if something gets in your way, he goes out to get it. And that includes hurting others, but that also includes things he actually wants to do, which is like saving others. So clearly he like wants to, I think that's how I interpret that scene, is he's struggling because he wants to go save them. I think those verses he reads too, like, dang, I should go help, be a good Samaritan and help these guys out. But at the same time, that takes away from his mission. So I don't know. That's just how I've always thought of it.
Yeah. What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, you know, he's sitting there like up on those racks, and clearly like he could go kill those guys in 5 seconds. But, you know, I think he mumbles at one point something like, you know, it doesn't concern you, blah, 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 to himself. And like, you know, not to jump ahead too far in the movie, but like the point at which he saves Solera later in the movie.
Interesting.
Like he kind of like reprioritizes, and he explains to her like, you know, I'm supposed to do, the book says do unto others more than I would do to myself or whatever. And so it's like an interesting like journey he's on of, you know, he's so committed to bringing this book out there. He'll kill if people are in his way, but he's not even really going to, you know, out of his way to help people. And I just thought, you know, that was really interesting of like how his whole life, or since the Flash or whatever, 31 years, this was what he was committed to, and he's so strongly committed. But then at the very end, he kind of finally realizes, like, okay, it's not quite just what I have in my head or the message I think I'm doing. I need to, be serving these other people as well. And that was like an interesting moment early, on the road with the couple. Yeah. That kind of led to that realization.
Yeah. Sure. So, I mean, I think it's pretty easy for us to have this scene, and we're kind of talking about, like, this is literally, we talked in the Toy Story episode that you could see and reframe Toy Story as the prodigal son. Like, it's basically kind of like that story. We could say that this one is kind of like the Good Samaritan, and maybe Eli is representing all three of the people who passed the person on the road at different points, which might actually be more an interesting change to that story, is that we kind of embody this person at all points in our life, that sometimes we are the person who steps over the guy on the side of the street, and sometimes we are the person who takes our cloak and gives everything that we can. What do you think of that as, like, that statement as a believer, that it's like, well, this doesn't concern me? Because it's kind of, because I think, especially, like, I mean, to just be, I guess, kind of direct, I've been having conversations with people about, there's a lot of people of like, oh, COVID and this, and, it just feels like the world's falling apart and it's really scary and there's all this stuff. So they're all, it's like, we must be everything getting really close to wrapping up. And part of me is like, I don't think so. And I think that because I don't think that aligns with God's narrative across the whole scripture, that if you look at it, that he's just going to, like, snap us all out of here, like, and be done with it. I think what he's instead going to do is call his church and his family and his children to become more like Eli, as he does at the end of the movie, where he's making the decision. He's saying, okay, this does concern me and I need to be a part of it. What do you think of that phrase in the modern evangelical, we're specifically in America, modern evangelical American Christianity, that phrase, this doesn't concern me? Do you think that's playing out a lot, a little, every so often, specific spheres of church culture? We'll all admit readily that that's definitely all of us. Like, I'm guilty of that. But just kind of parsing out that topic and using this movie as a reference, like, what would you say to that phrase?
I think, a lot of, well, for one thing, to answer your question, I think that phrase of "this doesn't concern me," I don't think that should really apply to Christians very often, because there's no one that Jesus wouldn't have stopped to save or help or witness to. And I think, like, sometimes I've seen certain groups or churches kind of like shy away from, helping certain groups or, pouring their ministry, and, they just kind of are like, okay, yeah, we'll pour a lot into this and this, but maybe that's not for us. And, you might not have the resources to do certain things, obviously.
Yeah.
But just like the attitude of it, like, I think that, we aren't called to not, just to do things that are easy and safe, right?
Yeah.
Christ calls us to be challenged and do things that are dangerous sometimes, or difficult or controversial. So, it's just an interesting, like, I think that phrase you're talking about of not doesn't apply to me or whatever, don't really think that that's a phrase that Christians should prescribe to very often.
Josh, where do you land, or how do you kind of see that phrase fitting into church culture?
Yeah, definitely going off of what Jake said too. I agree with what he said. It even makes me think, one, yeah, I think it's an overused phrase that all of us, I think, are guilty of thinking or saying from time to time. But what really makes me think when I hear it is, like, what's the heart behind, like, what is it pointed towards? If I'm saying that doesn't really apply to, like, that's not for me. When I say it, at least I can say I'm guilty of just thinking about myself. I'm looking at an uncomfortable situation. I'm like, I don't want to put myself in some unknown territory where I got to stretch myself out. So therefore, it doesn't apply to me. Very rarely, I think, we actually use that phrase for what it actually means, which is it actually doesn't apply to us. Like, Jesus didn't call us to the things that apply to us, So as Christians, it doesn't make sense that we draw that boundary now, when most of the time the criteria for what we say really applies to us. Like we don't actually go into that. We just say, that doesn't really apply to me. So
Yeah.
so
Gotcha.
that's my thought. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.